Awesome. Thank you. Sorry, we just want to keep the meeting going so everybody can get home. Okay, so next up is our Board of Directors Chair Report.
Hey guys, I know it's pretty late, so I'll try to keep this short as possible. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Angus Lai. I'm the chair of the Board of Directors for this year. And so the board's last in-person meeting was during BOCO. And so for your summer council meeting, I think I should have sent a board report basically giving a summary of what we've done during that meeting. But I know I wasn't present, so if you guys have any questions about that, feel free to ask me at the end of this or send me an email. But the next meeting will be Friday, October 4th, so that's going to be next Friday. And the things of significance are that we are going to be reviewing the first quarterly financials. We're going to be looking at our board evaluation survey. And then we're just going to be getting some updates from our 3 committees as well as from the executives, mainly about Purple Fest and opt-outs. And then we also have our hiring campaign going on right now, so we're trying to replace one of our directors who resigned to go to med school. And we'll also be hiring 4 directors for the February 2020 term. And then lastly, as you guys know, you just gave speaking rights to the resource members, and that's what I am, as well as all the other directors. So this is pretty rare, but if there are ever any questions or concerns about the corporate side of the USC, so that's just things about like HR and labor relations, audit, banking, and legal, I can definitely speak up if you guys have any questions about that. But yeah, unless there are any questions, thanks.
All right, awesome. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you. All right, next up is our Advocacy Standing Committee report.
Hi, everyone. I will keep this very, very brief. We passed one motion at our September meeting, which was the Women's Safety Policy Paper, which passed tonight. We successfully selected a new recording secretary, which is super helpful to me, so shout out to President Karuhara. And we got a update from Councillor Ficarani about the sustainability checklist, which is still in preliminary research, but is on the way. That's all.
All right, thank you. Sorry, I was going to say if there's any questions. Okay, so no questions. We will move along to our Governance and Finance Committee report.
Hi. Similarly, I'm going to keep it short and sweet. We've been doing a lot of, I would call it administrative work with Declan, just making sure that things are in line. I don't want to be preachy, but I'm going to be preachy. I've gotten the sense that not a lot of people are showing up to committees, and it's been real hard to get quorum. So just, that's part of your duties here. Show up to meetings. I know, for instance, governance and finance has really struggled. So just do your stuff, and that's it. That's all.
All right, thank you. And any questions about any of that? Okay, awesome. So last but not least, Student Experience Standing Committee.
Great, thank you. The Standing Committee, we decided the 4 focuses for our initial consultation for the year to draft our recommendations. So the 4 that we're going to be working with are the Peer Support Center, Food Support Services, Environmental Sustainability with a focus on Enviro Western, and the Income Tax Clinic. Just so everyone's aware, basically what we're doing is just initial consultation to figure out more, so we can learn more about the service and figure out what the people running those services really need support-wise from the USC, and then we'll draft some recommendations on how we can better make those accessible to students. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, any pressing questions for David? Okay, awesome. Okay, so we will now move on to our 4 discussion section. We have bylaw 2. Declan, do you want to start this off? Or, okay, Bardia, President Gelayer.
So, I know it's pretty late, but one thing that I know Kat and I noticed in our election, I'm sure a lot of you who ran in elections noticed, was that there were some issues with bylaw 2 specifically sanctions list and things like that. Declan and our team as a whole have sort of looked at what we can do to revamp it, maybe change a little bit, along with our associate governance. So because we are trying to we just want to get a general sense of how everyone felt about it today. I don't really want this to get into debate or any like very, very specific detail. I kind of just want to go like maybe 10, 15 minutes so we could get a feel of how everyone's feeling about it. And then we can come back later on with like at the next meeting with more detailed debate about it. And then we can have official ones passed in that November sitting of council, which is why we're just bringing it up early so we know what direction to send our governance dogs in, you know? So.
Okay. All right. Councillor Kamenetsky. Yep.
So, sorry. If I could just speak to that, and just I'll speak about this more broadly. You know, as I've said, one of my priorities is looking at the bylaws strategically, and like the exact timeline that goes on is really up for grabs. I mean, in terms of like the feasibility of having it in place for the next election, like this needs to be, if we're going to change things, it has to be like passed probably by November council, or else it just doesn't happen, right? In fact, October council would be even better. Don't know if it's feasible, so probably November council. In terms of the actual, like what we're looking for, like you guys can just tell me to look at bylaw 2 and suggest updates to council, and I will, and you know, Jack and I will work very hard and make an entirely new one. But at the end of the day, you know, neither of us are elected to be where we are. You know, we work for council and the board, and while we can use our judgment to build this, we would appreciate the input that you guys have, and that can come out now. We have questions up here to kind of prompt the discussion, but that can also come, you can email me, you can book a meeting. I like to say, like, my door is metaphorically always open. If my door was actually always open, that would be terrible for productivity. But, so any of those ways of giving that feedback, but what we want to do right now is, as the first part of that, open up the floor, and if anyone else has anything else they want to convey by email or in person, feel free to book a meeting, because I'm always happy to talk to you about it, or take your emails.
All right. Yeah, Councillor Cronin.
All right, amazing. So I'll try to be super quick. So I had two issues when running an election. I'll quickly talk about the sanctions, which I think the biggest reason why they didn't work, in my opinion, was it was a sliding scale of severity from least severe kind of action taken during an election to most severe. And it was really arbitrary into A, how those were sorted, and B, there was no real breathing room for like, okay, you can do this thing to an opposing candidate, but it's always gonna be that same level of severity, disregarding like intent or how often, like to what degree it was done. So say you invited more people to your group or whatever than is allowed or listed. If you did it by 10 or by like 400, it would have the same punishment, which didn't make a lot of sense to me. And then another issue I had was, I think there needs to be more stuff in bylaw 2 that holds the elections committee more accountable. In terms of actually running as a candidate, I had a lot of personal issues with communications with the elections committee, and I know a lot of other people had a lot of issues with how it was run. There was a ton of problems in the actual voting structure, and I don't know if there was a lot of accountability. I'm not entirely sure, but that's something I'd love to see. But yeah, thanks guys.
All right, thank you. Councillor Kamenetsky.
I just have a quick question before I ask. Is there a set way for the CRO to give the initial all candidates presentation? Because a huge difference that really really got us last year, I feel, is that when I ran in my first year, which was the year before this one, the CRO really went into like every single minute detail that was up on the PowerPoint, made sure we understood before she moved on, etc. This time around, it was more of like I know you guys want to get out of here, so we're just going to like breeze through it. You know, you can read up on this in the PowerPoint later. I really think that messed with a lot of people, like definitely me, because like I needed a refresher too. And then another point is cross campaigning was often like people were confused on what that meant. If you could like run for something and also promote your friend who's running for something, but you have like two separate media accounts or whatever you want to call it. And third, the residents' campaigning hours, I'm pretty sure that they ended way before the quiet hours began. And I was just wondering why that was the case, because the window of time is pretty short.
Is it okay if I speak to this?
Yeah.
Okay, so few things. First of all, regarding the specific rules, accept the feedback, and I've written that down. I just wanted to make a quick note regarding the kind of execution details, and I think it's just an important kind of check to put on what we're all talking about here. And what that is it's that every single person around this table, minus people at the head of the table, are considered to be like part of the political side of the organization, right? And we do pass the bylaws. But like the actual execution details, if you go back a couple of years, my position actually used to supervise the CRO. That's not the case anymore. It's now under Advocacy and Government Services, and that's designed to build intentional separation. And suffice it to say that Advocacy and Government Services is right now in a really great position to provide just unprecedented levels of support to the CRO. But at the end of the day, that's something that doesn't belong in a bylaw, nor is it something that's really council's jurisdiction to talk about, because at the end of the day, that is something that we kind of need to respect the independence of that office, because that's why we moved elections out of that, so that they could administer it in an independent way. Like, certainly understand the concerns, and like, you know, they're an absolute concern you can have, but it's not really something you can write in a bylaw at the end of the day, like, oh, you know, you shall be this level of detailed. It's very much in the execution side. In regard to the residence rules, I do want to note that those rules are not set by the USC. Just for the record, those are set by housing.
All right, thank you. Just a note, please refrain from talking to the people beside you and just give your attention to whoever's speaking. I know it's late, but we're almost done, so thank you. And Councillor Fakirani?
Okay, sorry, that took a second. Councillor Fakirani, social science counselor. A couple things. My biggest concern with bylaw 2 was the coin toss. I think it's extremely unfair if two candidates tie that the decision is made based on a coin toss. I'm not saying that I have a better solution, but I just don't think that is democratic, and I'm not a fan of that. That's like my biggest thing, and I also want to recognize that it takes a lot of energy, effort, time to actually run an election, and an election of this size especially will obviously have its bumps and challenges. So again, these recommendations do come from like a good place. The other things I think need clarification. This one didn't necessarily impact me because my campaign was mostly just me and Canva, but for a lot of people, there was confusion about volunteers, how many volunteers you can have, when you can start recruiting your volunteers, stuff like that. And then there was also a lot of concerns regarding if someone is affiliated with the USC or a faculty council, whether or not they can endorse or join a campaign team. So I think those are also two things to look into. And then just to back up what Councillor Cronin said, I think there needs to be just a little bit more accountability with our DRO and CRO. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Does any... oh, yeah, sorry. Councillor Adewusi.
Yeah, Councillor Adewusi, science counselor. So I guess I just wanted to speak about like some of my experiences with like the last election. I guess most of what I have to say is like related to the merit point system, and I guess a lot of this is like questions because I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, it's just questions. So I'm wondering if the changes made to the merit point system actually reduced on like the number of people trying to like budget their way with offenses, because I know that that was an issue in past years where people would try to, you know, they would see what minor offenses they could get away with and then just budgeted so they wouldn't get kicked out of the election. And something else that I found really concerning was I heard of candidates and like personally, and I wouldn't want to like say any names, but I've heard of candidates personally who were aware of like their opposing candidates a possible infraction, and not only did they want to like harp on a possible infraction, but they all wanted to almost instigate a possible infraction just to get the other candidate like kicked out of the race. That's something I observed, and I'm wondering what measures could be taken to avoid people like both budgeting to avoid getting kicked out of the race and also trying to get their opponents kicked out of the race. Yeah, that's it.
All right, thank you. And President Barroso?
Victoria Barroso, Science President. I won't talk about the problems with the science ballot because those are being addressed. But I did have a question about kind of going off of the major and minor violation system. I feel like the like what falls or constitutes under like a major violation and minor violation need to be like relooked at. I feel like some of them, like the major violations, were like very extreme cases that I don't know, like may never happen, but there were a lot of things that fell kind of under that minor category, and then it was very vague as to like how those would be addressed, and there's a lot of confusion between like what was supposed to be a fine and what was supposed to be a major or a minor violation. I feel like that needs to be either relooked at or clarified, as well as the process to submit or review appeals. I know I experienced some things with like the appeals board and the process of like getting information from them and going through an appeal and how many times somebody can submit an appeal for a certain thing or infraction. So maybe like some more clearer guidelines about how that process works, especially because most candidates don't have to deal with it or don't expect to have to deal with it, and then when they do have to deal with it, it's very stressful, especially towards the end of the election, and potentially once results have been released as well. So that's something that we could look at as well.
All right, Councillor Lee? Sorry, can you just use a microphone? Thank you.
Councillor Lee, Science Councillor. So obviously one of the concerns that a lot of the candidates had was on the balloting, and we're just hoping that there would be like contingencies in place so that balloting issues where students couldn't vote will not happen again. And also I think another great concern is a lot of the infractions or violations were more of like students not knowing like what constituted an infraction. I just wanted to maybe like have a more like informative session. I think President Kamenetsky said that. So I would just say we would have like a more informative like presentation on what would constitute like a violation or a fine.
All right, thank you. President Gelayer?
Yeah, these are all really good. I really like this. I just want to say like the reason we're not going to be answering it first of all is because I don't think it's appropriate for Kat or I to have really any input sort of on this, just because like we don't want to have anything over the EGC, and Jack and Declan are just taking notes to see like what we can do with this information. We're not just like, oh, that's a really great concern. Next, like we're like actually like taking note of it. We're gonna like look see what we can do. Like I agree with all of these. These are all issues that we're gonna try to address. Yeah, that's it.
All right, Councillor Kadahata?
Not really. Sorry, do I have to introduce myself?
Yeah, please.
Okay, Councillor Kaduhata, Arts and Humanities. So not really relating to balloting, but some of the experiences that I had with campaigning was there was a lot of confusion with some of my constituents about double majors being able to vote, because they just apparently, like I was just told that they would just be able to vote in the faculty that they were registered in. But for example, I had friends who had equal double major in like social science and arts, but they were more involved in the arts faculty, but they couldn't participate in that election, which is I think is just a kind of I don't know how you would cross that line, but that's one. And the other thing was in relation to finances. I was wondering if there was a possibility to look into ways for not having it to be like a reimbursement process, because my campaign manager had to drop like $100 from out of pocket and then get reimbursed after, but it was a bit of a it was a longer reimbursement process than was planned, so that was just a little bit difficult for him. And this is a smaller note, but my opponent and I wanted to do a campaign together online to promote the election and have like a platform together as a joke, and that was apparently cross-campaigning even though we were going for the same position, so that was kind of confusing, but that's a smaller note.
All right. Thank you. Any other points for discussion? Okay.
Sorry, if I could just close this off by saying one thing. I really appreciate all the input here. Again, in alignment with my previous point, what we're specifically going to be focusing on in this review is like bylaw 2 and the provisions in there. So it's really the big areas where this feedback is super, super useful is in the sense of, what the specific policies are, what the grid looks like in terms of how sanctions are used and stuff like that. So the stuff that's actually in bylaw 2 is where they're really going to be focusing this. But there's been a lot of other great feedback that's come out. Some of it is stuff that's under kind of jurisdiction of like our tech infrastructure. Some's been under the jurisdiction of the elections administrators with advocacy and government services, which we don't have any control over. And then the bylaw 2 stuff, I'm absolutely going to be taking that stuff and really incorporating that into the review I do. But I will surely pass along all this feedback to all the other bodies so they can take their action on those specific things.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. Any other additional points? Okay. So now that there's no other points, we're going to move on to new business. Does anybody have any time-sensitive items for new business? Okay, so seeing no other items for new business, can I get somebody to move for termination? All right, President Gillier, Councillor Carlson. All right, the meeting is terminated. Thank you for coming, guys. Okay. Oh, also, if anybody, sorry.